Good evening, everyone. Good to see so many of you are interested in this wonderful topic and this wonderful presentation. I want to begin by thanking Rabbi Feld for making himself available for this presentation, also to Cantor Dave Mintz for arranging everything and providing the platform here, or helping with the platform so that we can all attend this presentation. So thank you, Dave. So I think most of us at BJ are acquainted with Rabbi Feld's work. We come into contact with his work every single Shabbat because he is the senior editor of Sidur Lev Shalem, as well as Machzor Lev Shalem. So we see the result of his passion and his work and his wisdom reflected on the pages of the Sidur every Shabbat. And we're very grateful, Ed, to you for this really wonderful contribution to our prayer practice. I have to say, I met Rabbi Feld long before I met him. And by this, I mean I was a rabbinical student in Argentina in the 70s. And the seminary and my teacher, Rabbi Marshall Meyer, would have significant articles and essays translated into Spanish, as well as many books. Many of Heschel's books were translated into Spanish, but many important essays and articles that appeared in journals and magazines here in the United States, he had them translated into Spanish and published in a journal that came out 4 times a year, which was called Machshavot, which means thoughts or ideas. And this was Marshall's way to make available all of this scholarship and wisdom and all the thinking that was going on here in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And there was a very meaningful article that I read and reread, which opened my mind, and I would say it was very transformative for me and very eye-opening. And it was an article by Rabbi Feld called Towards an Agadic Judaism. And it's just, I'm sure it's online and I'm sure people can read it. And you can see how many of the things that he points out to in this essay, in this article, actually have become, part of our Judaism, our normative Judaism in the liberal communities, particularly in the conservative movement and others. So Rabbi Feld was also earlier in his career, he was a Hillel rabbi at Princeton, at the University of Illinois. He was a rabbi at the SAJ, our neighboring congregation here on 86th Street, for a number of years. In the 90s, we were happy to be neighbors here. He was then a rabbi in residence at JTS for a number of years, 2001 to 2008. And he's impacted thousands and thousands of people, particularly with his books, a book about post-Holocaust theology, another book about opening the wisdom and the beauty and the poetry of the book of Psalms, and now this book, and of course, as I said before, the Sidur and the Machzor, which are so central to our liturgical experience at BJ and many, many, many hundreds of congregations around the country and in Canada. So this is his latest book, The Book of Revolutions. The book will be available. I think they will put a link later in the chat so people can acquire the book. I got this book a number of months ago, and I was immediately taken and fascinated by it. I really, I studied Bible. I read articles and pieces and so on, but this I did not know. It was a big revelation for me, the work in this book. So I just want to begin by asking a couple of questions, and then I will let Rabbi Feld make his presentation. So first, by the way, I was reading really deeply into this book when I was in Israel on my 2-month sabbatical, and as I was coming to the end, I inadvertently left it in the train from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. So I had to wait quite a while until I was able to read the end of the book. But we're coming to Shavuot in just a few days, and we're going to read about the moment of the revelation of the Torah. It's dramatic, magnificent, awesome moment of the revelation of the Torah, and we have this idea that the Torah came in one piece, revealed to Moshe and to the people of Israel, and we read it as one story from beginning to end, from Simchat Torah to Simchat Torah. We read the Torah as really one unit. And we know many centuries ago, people made the discovery that, in fact, there are a lot of contradictions, theological contradictions, linguistic contradictions, and also all sorts of things that indicate that perhaps, after all, it's not one unit, not the work of one author, and so on. And I think in this book, Rabbi Feld digs a lot deeper into that, and he's able to trace, particularly in some of the legal sections of the Torah, in legal sections of the Torah, he's able to actually trace where these sections came from and what are the events in later post-Torah days when these legal sections actually took shape. So I would like, Ed, maybe we start there, if you don't mind. Just tell us the story of your discovery here.
So, first of all, thank you so much, Rolly. It's such a pleasure to be with you. I get to see you for Kabbalat Shabbat on Zoom, and and when I was in New York, I got to see you in person. So it's just lovely to be with you, and it's lovely to do this with you. And thank you for that lovely introduction. When I was a rabbi in residence at the Jewish Theological Seminary, which meant essentially that I was mentoring rabbinical students, I realized that a lot of rabbinical students, when they learn biblical criticism, that is to say, the multi-authorship of the Torah, that they lost their faith in some way. They felt shattered by the knowledge that, oh, it's not Moses who wrote this. It was much more complex, much more over a period of time, many authors, and that takes away from the sense of this is the word of God given to Moses on Mount Sinai, which one might say holding up the Torah and Shabbat. So how does one relate to this? How does one relate to, that was my instinct was that each of the strands of Torah, each of the moments of creation of Torah was inspired by great spiritual striving and was attempting to put into words an experience of what it meant to live with God. And so I I felt that
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I felt that I wanted to present these different strands in a way that everybody would be able to see that the Torah was made up of spiritual teachings of different times and places, but that each of these spoke to us in a different way and could continue to speak to us.
Yeah, New York's a hard life.
The problem with trying to tease out the strands of the problem of trying to tease out the strands of Torah in the narrative portions is that you can't date them. Famously, it's JEPD, and so for a long while, everybody said J was early, and it was the in the court of Solomon that it was written, and then more recently, people say J is late. It's maybe the latest. Who knows when these were written? But for the legal portions, we can approximately date them. Famously, the book of Deuteronomy is a book that there is a general scholarly consensus that the book of Deuteronomy was found in the reign of Josiah, which means, let's say, 625, something like that, and BCE, and it was found in the reign of Josiah. And the Book of Kings reports what happened during the reign of Josiah when he found this book, and the prophetess Huldah says this is the book of the teaching of God, and it's adopted. And what happens? And what happens is shattering. That is, let me read a little bit from the Book of Kings, where you can read what Josiah did. He did away with the horses which the kings of Judea had dedicated to the sun at the entrance of the house of God. He burned the chariots of the sun. Imagine that when you entered the temple in Jerusalem before the reign of Josiah, what you met was a chariot dedicated to the sun. He tore down the cubicles of the male prostitutes in the house of Adonai at the place where women weave houses for Asherah. It was, Asherah is the Astarte, the consort of God, the female consort of God. And women are in the temple weaving for this consort. We don't know the function of these male prostitutes. Are they really sexual prostitutes? Are they really, does it mean something else? We have no idea, but what's going on in the temple is before Josiah is that there is a chariot to the sun which is being worshipped. There is an Asherah, a sense of God's consort, a female companion to God, and he destroys all of this. It's a almost violent revolution. It says he defiled the Tophet in Beit Hinnom Valley so that no one could pass his son or daughter through the fire to Moloch. The people who would dedicate their firstborn sons to Moloch, I don't know, the demon, to propitiate the other side. He tears it down. He tears everything down. He destroys. The king then ordered Hilkiah, the high priest, the deputy priest, and the keepers of the threshold to remove from the temple all the objects made for Baal, Asherah, and all the host of heaven. He burned them outside of Jerusalem on the terraces of Kidron and had their ashes carried to Bethel. So these are real. the tradition of worship of other gods and divinities is very strong in ancient Israel. And the belief that you should worship one God is a prophetic revolution. And it is carried out violently. And we know that this revolution is dated in a certain moment in time, and we can attach a book to it, which he reads out loud, which is the book of Deuteronomy. So we can date that. My teacher, Professor Ginsburg, proved that the law code in Exodus of Mishpatim that we read was written in northern Israel. That is, we have just discussed what happened in Judea, in Jerusalem. But from the time, according to the Bible, from the time of Solomon until the destruction of northern Israel by the Assyrian conquest, northern Israel was 10 times larger than Judea. It was the major power. And the festival cycle that's mentioned in Mishpatim is associated with northern Israel rather than Judea. The festival cycle there says the beginning of the year is in the fall. In Judea, the beginning of the year was in the spring. Earlier in Shemot, in Exodus, it says about the month of the Exodus. This is the month from which you went out from Egypt. This is the first day of the year. And so Mishpatim is written in northern Israel, not in Judea. Mishpatim, we can date at least by an end date. If it's written in northern Israel, it must have written before the destruction of northern Israel, which is around 720 BC. So that's roughly 100 years before Josiah that it was destroyed. It was probably written well before it was destroyed. It wasn't written at the moment of destruction. I believe that it is the result of the works of Elijah and Elisha and that prophetic movement. Mishpatim has a strong belief in a single God and a strong ethical underpinning, yes, of loving. One law should be for you and for the stranger among them. So there's a beautiful law in Mishpatim, which goes, if you see the donkey of your enemy and the load from the donkey has fallen off, if the donkey has struggled to get up the mountainside and the load it was carrying is fallen off, you should help repack the donkey. And it says, you should help even if it is your enemy. When you see the donkey of Oyvecha, your enemy, could you imagine a Ukrainian comes upon a Russian who has just had a car accident and says, oh, I see you, you're Russian. I know you're enemy, you're trying to conquer Ukraine at the moment, but I'll help you fix your tire. That you should repack the donkey of your enemy. It is a passage that is in fact so radical that Deuteronomy quotes this passage and says, when you meet the donkey of your neighbor, you should help him. You can see how Deuteronomy rewrites what it has received from Mishpatim. You can go through several passages in which you can see actual quotes in which just one word changes or a phrase just changes, but it has the same implications. So Mishpatim comes first, Deuteronomy comes second, and rewrites it and moves it in a different direction. Mishpatim talks about covenant, brit. It calls itself Sefer HaBrit. Deuteronomy talks about mitzvah. It's not so much, it does use the word brit, but the brit is to obey the mitzvot. You do this because you're commanded, not because you've agreed to it, not because you've covenanted. You do it because this is the right thing to do and you'll do it. Alongside of Deuteronomy, there are a group of priests who are trying to distill a religion that can represent an ideal. They are priests who are not necessarily the prime priests in Jerusalem. They're in fact upset with a little bit with Jerusalem and its concentration on ritual. These priests say, and in one of the most beautiful passages in Torah, you shall be holy because the Lord your God is holy. The reason for doing this whole system of law is not because of a brit, if you agree to, not because of commandment, because God tells you to do it, but you should do it because there's something in you which is holy and which you need to express. You can become holy. You can be holy like a priest. And these priests continue into exile. The exile when Jerusalem is destroyed in 589, and the people are dispersed. And in Babylonia, they have a dream returning to the land of Israel. Their dream is when we return, we're all going to be equal. We're all going to have an equal share of the land. And every 50 years, even if you've sold off your portion, even if you've been forced off the land, you will return to your original portion. And every family will have, once again, what they started out with. It's a great dream. It's a wonderful dream. It's such a wonderful ideal, the Jubilee. Every year on Yom Kippur, at the end of Yom Kippur, we blow the shofar because this might be the Jubilee year, and the Jubilee year should be announced by the shofar on Yom Kippur. It's a great dream that could not possibly ever be implemented. It's a dream you dream in exile when you're not in the land, but you dream of going back to the land. So that final element of Torah is that final element which is written in exile. 3 different visions what a Jewish life should be about: covenant, mitzvah, holiness. What I argue in the book is that each of them can be a part of our lives, and we can. These theologies are at different moments. I feel that I do this because I'm somehow covenanted. I'm a part of this people, and I'm doing this because this is the Jewish thing to do. There's sometimes that I do it. I don't know why I'm doing it, but the Torah says to do it. I'll try it out. I'll do it. I'll do it because it's a mitzvah. And there's many times when I perform a Jewish ritual where I feel I'm approaching something holy and want to include holiness in it. So the beauty of Torah is that it can speak to me at very different moments in my life, and different passages can have different meanings. And that to me is the great contribution of studying the Torah as a historical document. That is because it has this history, because it has this different set of approaches, it has the ability to speak to me. Because I'm not just one person who has one outlook. I have different moods, I have different moments, I have different parts of myself, and the Torah speaks to all the different parts. Rolly?
I want to ask you, that's a very moving what you just shared, you know, that this approach allows you to relate in different moments of your life, maybe even different moments of a day or of a week. It allows you to connect to different parts of your practice or your theology. Or now the question is, you know, somebody or somebody's group of people eventually put together this document, this text, the sacred text of ours, stitched it together, right? Sometimes they tried to make the stitches somewhat invisible, and sometimes they actually left the stitches very, very clearly there, so that you read one chapter and then you read the next chapter, you see that there's some tension, that there's a different story being told, the story of creation, of the creation of Adam and Chava and so on. You can see the contradiction and the tension is there. Now, when somebody came, or somebody's, to put together this text, if it were today, probably, you know, people who have an ideology and a certain vision, you know, and a certain ideology, they would say, well, you know, what I agree with, I will leave, and what I don't agree with or doesn't agree with me, I will just take it out. I'll smooth the differences, and I will release a book or a document or a text that actually reflects my thinking, my ideology, or the ideology of my group or of our times. But here you have a document that contains ideas, theologies, practice from different times, and that sometimes, as you said, are not necessarily in harmony with one another. Why would somebody or these people would do something like that?
It's so interesting, right? It's so interesting that they were willing to put together a book that contained obvious contradictions, that you could read in Exodus, you know, a Jewish slave works for you a Hebrew slave works for you for 7 years. Then you can read in Deuteronomy 7 years, but when you free the person, you should give them a gift so they can hanek taniklo. You should give them, the person, a gift so that they're not thrown out from slavery and suddenly they have to build a life with nothing. You have to give people something that they can begin to live with and make a way for themselves. So Deuteronomy is a wonderful addition to Exodus. And then in the Holiness Code, we read in Leviticus, we read, no Hebrew can be a slave. So if no Hebrew can be a slave, how could you have Exodus and Deuteronomy? Or famously in Exodus, you read, every place in which you mention my name, I'll come and be with you. In other words, wherever you build a temple, wherever you build a sacred place, I'll come, I'll be the God. God's presence will be in every place. In Deuteronomy, you read, Ki im el hamakom asher yivchar Adonai, right? You only go to the one place which I have chosen. So the same Torah contains every place, one place, and you're asking, how could a series of editors seeing this do this? So I believe that they were trying to be honest to the tradition that they inherited. That is, there were various factions, right, in exile. There were monarchists, there were priests, there were prophets, there were, and each one of them had some idea of how do we go back and build the country together. And somehow a decision was made that we're going to include everybody. We are simply going to present the totality of the tradition which we inherited. And we'll see what happens, how it falls out, how we live. I think it became an interesting model for all of later Jewish writing. If you think of the Mishnah, when you read the Mishnah, it says, Rabbi Eliezer says to do this, Rabbi Shimon says to do this, Rabbi Yehuda says to do this. Well, who published the Mishnah and included all these different opinions in the Mishnah? Why would you do that? Or when you study the Gemara frequently, I think I would say 90% of the time, if there's a discussion of a halacha, you do not know what to do when you leave the page of the Gemara, because you've read so many different opinions and so many ups and downs that you have no idea what the conclusion is. I think there is a kind of Jewish mentality which was set in motion by Torah, which says we have to work this through, and we're not going to decide to have a single-minded tradition. And every attempt to have a single-minded tradition has failed. Maimonides famously wrote his Mishneh Torah because this is, he says at the beginning, you don't have to study any other book, just study my book and you'll know what to do. And so, first of all, there are commentaries on Maimonides. He was right about this, he's wrong about this. Where does he get this? He must mean this. What does he mean by this? So you could never, even in the Mishnah, but also sitting in Spain, the exiles from Germany then wrote the Arbat Turim, right, which was an entirely different compendium, referring to the Maimonides at the time, but saying many other things quite different than Maimonides. And then the Shulchan Aruch tries to say this is the law, and then again, you have this commentary on the side about how to do this, how to do this. I think there is that what the Torah set in motion was that there would be no single Judaism.
It's a powerful statement. I mean, I think that's probably, besides the discoveries that you've made about the different revolutions that generated the different law codes, which is fascinating, and the ideas that are then sort of embedded in those codes and how they reflect those revolutions and so on. And that's fascinating. But this, I think, is the most, in my view, the most radical and impactful conclusion of your book. In other words, that the Torah is, from the beginning, a pluralistic project. It is a pluralistic project deliberately, because you could say, look, we have all these different traditions, and we can't throw them away. I mean, somehow we have to include them all because we respect and revere what we received from the past. And so we have to weave it together because we can't throw anything away. We just have to keep everything. But another thing is to say, not only that, but it's deliberate for the sake of creating some sort of a multifocal or valence type of Judaism. In other words, it's fully against orthodoxy. The fact that then sort of orthodoxies in Judaism, one form or another form of orthodoxy then prevailed, both theologically and halachically and so on, is in many ways counter to the Torah. It's basically you know, we think the Torah is a monolithic Orthodox document, and then the liberal movements came and created some sort of a plurality of different things. And here it's the other way around. To begin with, this is a pluralistic document and text. Then came Orthodoxy, and now there's some, in modern times, some sort of restoration of some type of pluralism in Jewish life. I find this to be a very important and radical statement.
Yeah, I must say, you know, this is my opinion of what happened. There's another opinion circulating, which is that when Persia conquered the Babylonians, they wanted to have a sense of what the different religions in their empire were. And so they said to the Jews, you write a book which will tell us what you believe. And so they were, in this opinion, they were forced to do it rather than they voluntarily do it. I don't particularly like to go there. It's an alternate view, but I think that Ezra, Nehemiah, or the people who were with them, or the priests who wrote the Holiness Code, who were probably the ones who finally put all of it together. There's some evidence for that. That they saw themselves as keepers of a tradition, and they put their piece in a prominent place. It's the exact middle of the Torah, and in the ancient world, the climax of a document is not necessarily the end. The climax of the document is the middle. You know, you have to think of it as a pyramid, right? The point is really at the top. In Eicha, in the Book of Lamentations, chapter 3 is the height of the book. So the almost middle of the Torah is the Holiness Code. It's chapter 19 of Leviticus. The Holiness Code begins with chapter 17. It's almost exactly the middle of the book. And so the people who were the priests of the holiness movement put that at the center and put as the two pillars on the side, on the right side Exodus and on the left side Deuteronomy. But they were inclusive. They realized that they were not the sole carriers of the tradition. And I would say that for me today, to pick up on what you were saying, Romy, for me today, I believe that Judaism would be so much weaker if we lost any of our movements in America. That we're strong precisely because we're Jews. I'm glad that there's orthodoxy. I'm glad that there's conservative Judaism. I'm glad that there's reform. I'm glad that there's reconstruction. It is all part of a very creative moment in Jewish life. And we would be poorer if we would lose any of them. Just as we would be poorer if we would lose Exodus or lose Deuteronomy or lose.
Thank you so much. Maybe we'll open it up for a few questions. Dave, how would you suggest we we are 115 of us or more. How do you suggest we go about this?
So everyone just shout your question at once. No. I think given the size, exactly, to do just as Linda has done, if you've got a question, raise your virtual hand, and then when you're called on, you can unmute yourself.
So let's begin with Linda then.
Unmute yourself, Linda.
Linda, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Eddie. It's a very evocative way of trying to put all this together. I'm thinking back to something that Arthur Green wrote introducing the 400 years of Jewish spirituality. He talked about the variety in similar ways, although not so much historically as you are. And I remember him saying that the two things that have bound all these kinds of Judaisms were mitzvot and the tropes, the way we speak about these things, whether it's whatever we mean when we say Sinai, we share that concept, share concepts of Sinai. How do you see, what do you see as the binding influences, or where things come together that one might say is the heart? Or how do you then, where does this lead you to think about essences of Judaism, especially those things that really we would like to all share? That's, as varied as the movements are, that we share this.
So first of all, it's just great to see you, Linda. For me, the binding is the texts. We are relating to the same texts. We relate to Torah, for instance, as having established the language which we speak. We inherit rabbinic texts. You mentioned mystical texts. We inherit, what I would say is we inherit a language, and we speak a common language. The common language is the language of Torah, that all of us speak with different interpretations of what it all means, of how it all hangs together, of what its essence is. The critical thing is that no one of us has ever been victorious in defining the essence of Judaism. That is, famously, Maimonides had 13 articles of belief. This is what you must believe in order to consider yourself a religious Jew, a committed Jew. Immediately, some others disagreed with him, and someone else gives 3 things rather than 13 things that you must believe. And then someone else comes along and says 1 thing, what Torah set in motion precisely because of its pluralism was that we are never able to say, this is the essence. Mm-hmm. One person can say, for me, this is the essence of Judaism. But we've never had, in all of Jewish history, we've never had any agreement about what is the essence of Judaism. We've had various formulations, none of which have succeeded in winning the majority.
Thank you.
Who would like to ask? Ed, if you can, come a little closer to the microphone, because your voice is a little weak. Or speak a little louder. Yes, Brian, go ahead.
Thank you, Rabbi. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I'm buying the book tonight. But let me expand it a little bit. I know it's further afield than you went, but talk about, if you wouldn't mind, the remainder of the Bible, what got included, what didn't get included, and how does that relate to your thesis, whether it's Nevi'im or Ketuvim or whatever, the Apocrypha?
So I think I've talked about some of what I discovered in this adventure, because writing is always an adventure for me. I don't start out with a conclusion, but it's a discovery. I've talked about some of the discoveries, but one of the really critical discoveries for me was that each of these revolutions was instigated or follow the teachings of prophets of their times. And we have a sense of Nevi'im as being prophets as being outside of the system. They're against the establishment. What this really shows is that prophets were included in the establishment. That is, each of these law codes incorporate quite explicitly prophetic teachings. And if you understand prophetic teaching as having two teachings which are essential, one is the worship of the single God, worship of other gods, and not worship of any other divinities. And secondly, that God is, in God's essence, concerned with behavior, with ethical behavior. That God, what my teacher Yochanan Mopes taught a course at the seminary when I was a student called The Bible Against Its Near Eastern Environment. And what he taught us was that in pagan religion, ultimately, what you have is competition between gods. You have favorites of gods. You have, it is the opposite of the kind of ethics that the prophets teach. To believe in one God is the way of getting past competitive divinities, competitive friendship between gods. It is a way of getting past a kind of favoritism. It's a way of everyone is equal. Everyone is in the image of God. Everyone must be treated in a certain way. And so what prophets taught was the worship of a single God, which meant equity and an ethical life. And each of these three law codes have those principles as central elements of their teachings.
Thank you. Marisa, go ahead.
Thank you, Rabbi. I wanted to talk a little bit more about what you're talking about when you talk about essence, not in terms of God's essence, but in terms of how we feel as Jews in the different groups of Jewishness that we have. I find that the essence for me of Judaism, again, for me, has more to do with how it sounds and how it feels. The knowledge that on Shabbos, no matter where we are, no matter which shul you're at, someone is reciting the Shema. And that moment of oneness with the Jewish people and God, to me, is essential, is an essence. Not unlike my Yiddish mama and other things that reflect different parts of who we are as a culture and as a religion, as a society. I wonder what you think about that, please.
I'm very much in your camp. I think of Judaism as being a language. And it's the language which we speak. Different peoples of the world speak different languages. It's the language which we speak. I was very conscious this week, on Sunday, as I went to Binyan for Rosh Chodesh, right, that because of my Judaism, I'm really very conscious of a new moon, of the start of a lunar month. And I'm conscious on Pesach and Shavuot of, oh, we're getting out of winter and into a new season. And I'm conscious in the fall of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur as connecting me to a certain other kind of season. So it is for me the language I have by which I can enter into the world and understand the world around me, speak with the people and connect with a system of values.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to ask? I have one more question. I see that there's somebody. Judy, go ahead. And Amy, go ahead.
Thank you. Perhaps this was covered. I am so curious, since you were speaking about the Torah being of pluralistic voices coming in at different times, my curiosity is, how was it made a decision to know it was complete? And then after it was complete, then there was commentary. So how does that come to be that we know that there's a dead, like that's it, we're bookending it? And that's what I'm wondering.
So you're asking a question about a period of Jewish history for which we have no documents and no evidence. That is to say, we know of First Temple Judaism, right, and moments into the exile when we have some prophetic writings and we have Ezra and Nehemiah. But after that, we don't have histories being written. We don't know a lot for the next, I'd say, 100, 200 years. It's a kind of dark ages. So but what we do know is that there were other attempts. There is, for instance, something called the Book of Jubilees, which attempts to write a quite unified story, right, of what happened from beginning to end. So instead of for instance, having the first chapter of Genesis, which you have the story of the 7 days, and the second chapter, the third chapter, famously, of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and you have to say, but these are two contradictory accounts. How did they both get here, right? And what the Book of Jubilees does is, which later became Rabbinic Midrash as well, tell the story of chapter 2 and 3 as being at the end, as occurring at the end of the 6th day. So they actually rewrite the story to integrate it, to integrate the whole. We have something from the caves of Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls. We have something called the Temple Scroll. And in the Temple Scroll, there's an attempt to explain the laws of sacrifice in a way which is much clearer and following one after the other in a way in which it's much more choppy in the Torah. In different places you find different laws of sacrifices and so forth. So people made attempts to write a different Torah. It isn't like once written, that was it. I think, it was so well done that it became widely accepted, and the others didn't become accepted. And over time, because of its inclusiveness, which meant that different elite groups felt part of it, because of just the talent which it represents. I mean, we read Torah and we're amazed at the insightfulness of the language. It was such a good a piece of work. I think such a good piece of work because it wasn't written in one moment. I think great literature takes a long time to write. So gradually it became accepted, even as these other versions were around, and people tried to do something else that were not accepted.
Thank you.
Amy Wachtel, last question.
Okay, so it's really more of a reaction than a question, but I just wonder if you feel it, you know what I mean? I found it so exciting when you were saying there will be no single Jews from the get-go. The Torah was supposed to be all inclusive and, all that. And then you named every denomination and then some. And then I thought to myself, but what about the pork? In my mind thinking that's not okay for any group of Jew to think they can eat. But that just ends up reflecting my own upbringing or belief. So do you know what I'm saying? Like, it was like, wow, this is freeing. And it's like, but what about?
So two things. I mean, one is the way we can identify early Israelite settlements in the land of Israel is that the settlements connected with Jewish settlement have no pig. No pig bones are found in those. It seems to be that was, if you will, one of the earliest defining qualities of Israelite settlement. In pre-Davidic, these are the earliest settlements. Let's say settlements from 1100 BCE that have, so that's quite amazing that tradition seems to be the so strong and such the oldest tradition, and it's fascinating to me that Jews seem to be defined by eating. We'll leave it at that.
And drinking, Amy.
And drinking.
Every year for many, many years, at the very end of the Chagim, Hoshana Rabbah, and we finished the service of Hoshana Rabbah, and we beat the willows and everything, Amy would bring a bottle of etrog liqueur. So that's why I added the drinking. For many years, that was a tradition at BJ. Ed, I want to ask you or make a comment, maybe ask you a question. Life is full of contradictions and ambiguities and tensions, and somehow we are, we're caught, existentially caught in a place that it's difficult to resolve all these things, impossible to resolve all of these things in our lives, in the world. And then many of us, want to go to the Torah and want to go to religion in order to to find some certainty, to find some, just tell me the way it is, the right way, without contradictions, with certainty. And so, we're left after reading your book and after becoming even more aware that the Torah has contradictions in itself, unresolved tensions and things that live together one side to the other, that there is no place actually, to go to resolve all these things. And that we, in many ways, we have to live with it. Is that so?
I think that the resolution frequently happens in community. That is, one attaches oneself to a community of Jews whom one feels is sympathetic to one's own soul. In a previous time, it might be that there were some communities that centered their lives on Talmud study and some communities that centered their lives on mystical studies, and some communities that centered their lives on giving tzedakah. In the European world, it was frequently the case that there were lots of chevras, and you davened with your chevra. There was a chevra shas and a chevra bikur cholim and a chevra, the chevra. Some chevras studied, some chevras did Gemilut Chasadim, visiting the sick or taking care of the dead, or some specialized in ensuring that there was a public kitchen. So I think one finds support for a certain way of life by being part of a community. And different communities then have their Torah and their halacha.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So we're really, really grateful for this presentation, for your book, Ed. It was really a wonderful overview of your book and your ideas and what you've given us. You continue to give us really wonderful things from book to book and from Mahzor to Sidur.
Weekday Sidur is being prepared.
The weekday Sidur, wonderful. Wonderful. We're really eager to have it. And here is Dave just put in the chat the link so that you can access the book and actually purchase it if you would like. It's a wonderful Hanukkah gift. So you can begin to, you can order it now and keep it in your home, keep a few copies, and then comes Hanukkah, you'll distribute it. It's great for birthdays and so on. So it's really, I'm being humorous, but it's a really wonderful book to read and to give. So once again, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Dave, for your help. Thanks, Ed, for this great presentation. We hope to see you soon and in person. Come visit us at BJ.
Thank you so much, Romy.
And thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. And Chag Sameach to everyone if we don't see each other until then.
Ready to go back to Sinai.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.